Christians hold that morality is objective and real. Martin Luther King put the Christian perspective of objective morality like this. The first principle of value that we need to rediscover is this, that all reality hinges on moral foundations. In other words, that this is a moral universe, and that there are moral laws of the universe just as abiding as the physical laws. Whereas, on the other hand, atheists hold that morality is subjective and illusory. That morality is merely a social construct that we basically can make up as we go along. Richard Dawkins put the atheist overall view of morality like this. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Historically speaking, something that resembles a moral argument for God's existence can be found in the fourth of Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways. But probably the most influential versions of the moral argument for belief in God can be traced back to Immanuel Kant. Whereas in modern times, C.S. Lewis's book Mere Christianity, which was an extremely popular book on apologetics and still is, begins with the moral argument for God's existence. Here's a video that gets the basic points of C.S. Lewis's moral argument across. And here you can read or listen to C.S. Lewis's entire book, Mere Christianity, on this website. More recently, Dr. William Lane Craig has also popularized the moral argument for the existence of God. Here's a short animated video that clearly and concisely explains the basics of the moral argument for God's existence. The moral argument is summed up at the 4.5-minute mark of the video and can be stated as such. Premise 1. If God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2. Objective moral values and duties do exist. Conclusion. Therefore, God exists. Ironically, many atheists, and one of their main arguments against the existence of God, the argument from evil, unwittingly concede the reality of objective morality. Specifically, they state, there exists a large number of horrible forms of evil and suffering in their argument. But this is a self-defeating position. As David Wood puts it, by declaring that suffering is evil, atheists have admitted that there is an objective moral standard by which we distinguish good and evil. And C.S. Lewis, who happened to be a former atheist, put the failure of the argument from evil like this. My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? It goes on to say, if there were no light in the universe and therefore no creatures with eyes, we should never know it was dark. Dark would be without meaning. And although, as is falsely portrayed in the following video, Einstein never actually had this encounter as a child, nevertheless, I like the clarity of the child's answer to the professor's claim that God had created evil. Specifically, the child in the video says to the professor, God did not create evil. Evil is the result of what happens when man does not have God's love present in his heart. It's like the cold that comes when there is no heat, or the darkness that comes when there is no light. And here's a video playlist where Dr. Craig addresses many of the objections from atheists concerning the moral argument for God's existence. And in the following article, Jonathan McLatchie states that the moral argument for the existence of God is indeed a robust argument, and that critics of the argument often make the same fundamental mistakes in addressing the argument. Specifically, Jonathan states, the moral argument is a robust argument for the existence of God. It is important to distinguish between moral ontology and epistemology when engaging in this debate, since these categories are frequently conflated by atheist critics. And while I agree with Jonathan McLatchie that the moral argument for God is certainly robust in its current philosophical form, in my honest opinion, there is something very important that is missing from the moral argument for God as it is currently set up. Namely, the main claim in the argument is that morality actually is objective and real, and it is not merely subjective and illusory. And since morality is claimed to be objectively real in the moral argument, then there ought to be some way to test this claim scientifically and see if it holds water. In fact, Immanuel Kant's requirement for the moral argument to be considered valid was that influences could arise from outside space-time. He considered it a major weakness in the moral argument that such influences could not be empirically established. Dr. Suarez, in the following video, explains Immanuel Kant's empirical requirement for the moral argument to be considered valid, and shows that Kant's empirical requirement for the moral argument has now been experimentally met in quantum mechanics. And although Dr. Suarez certainly makes a compelling case that Kant's criteria has been met for validating the moral argument for God, the physical reality of objective morality can be even more firmly established with empirical evidence than Dr. Suarez had apparently realized in the video. Indeed, we find much empirical evidence to support the Christian's claim that morality is indeed objectively real. For instance, the following study establishes the objective reality of morality by showing that moral evaluations of harm are quote-unquote instant and emotional. Moreover, in the following study, it actually shows that our moral intuition itself transcends space and time. Specifically, in the following study, they found that subjects responded strongly to emotional images compared to neutral images, and that the emotional response occurred between a fraction of a second to several seconds before the image appeared. And in the following meta-analysis of 26 reports that were published between 1978 and 2010, the researchers found that your body can anticipate morally troubling situations between 2 and 10 seconds before it happens. Thus, Immanuel Kant's criteria for accepting the validity of the moral argument has now been met on two levels. First, it has been met by showing that there are indeed influences arising from outside space-time, as he had stipulated. And secondly, and more importantly, it has been more specifically validated by showing that the human body possesses moral intuitions that transcend space and time. Moreover, in the preceding paper, one of the researchers remarked that we can't explain the anticipatory activity of the body using present-day understanding about how biology works, though explanations related to recent quantum biological findings could potentially make sense. And, exactly as she thought, quantum biological findings do indeed shed light on how it might be possible for the body to anticipate morally troubling situations before they happen. In fact, as the following video shows, findings in quantum biology go much further than she stipulated and gives us strong physical evidence that humans possess a transcendent component to their being on the molecular level that is not reducible to any possible material explanation. That is to say, findings from quantum biology now give us experimental evidence strongly suggesting we do indeed have a transcendent soul that is capable of living beyond the death of our material bodies, just as Christians have held all along. The following is also of related interest. Since unguided Darwinian processes have never shown the origination of even a single gene and/or protein, as these following references make clear, since unguided Darwinian processes have never shown the origination of even a single gene and/or protein, then it is very interesting to note that the gene expression of humans are designed in a very sophisticated way so as to differentiate between hedonic moral happiness and noble moral happiness. The following paper states that there are hidden costs of purely hedonic well-being, and goes on to say, at the cellular level, our bodies appear to respond better to a different kind of well-being, one based on a sense of connectedness and purpose. Moreover, and as would be expected if morality were objectively real as Christians hold, it is now found that atheists suffer physically and mentally as a result of forsaking the objective reality of morality in general and from forsaking God in particular. Professor Andrew Sims, former president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, states that the advantageous effect of religious belief and spirituality on mental and physical health is one of the best kept secrets in psychiatry and medicine generally. He goes on to state, lower rates of depression and faster recovery from depression, lower rates of suicide and fewer positive attitudes towards suicide, less anxiety, less psychosis and fewer psychotic tendencies, lower rates of alcohol and drug use and abuse, less delinquency and criminal activity, greater marital stability and satisfaction. And in the following meta-analysis of studies, it was found that active religious involvement increased the chance of living longer by some 29%, and participation in public religious practices, such as church attendance, increased the chance of living longer by 43%. Moreover, not only do individuals suffer, but society at large also suffer when governments impose secular thinking onto society. First off, in establishing this fact, it's important to first note that religious students are more moral than atheists or agnostics. Secondly, the following video goes over the devastating moral effects for society at large when prayer was removed from public schools in America. And here's the site highlighting the sobering statistics that David Barton had highlighted in the preceding video. And this following site offers a brief analysis of Barton's graphs. As the preceding sobering studies clearly indicate, perhaps the government should, instead of pouring billions upon billions of dollars into our failing public school systems to no substantial effect, instead put prayer back into schools. Just a thought. Moreover, besides the devastating moral impact on society at large when prayer was removed from public schools, the secular mandate that only Darwinian evolution can be taught in public schools has also had a significant detrimental moral impact for society at large. Richard Weikart, author From Darwin to Hitler, states that only in the late 19th century, and especially the earliest 20th century, did significant debate erupt over issues relating to the sanctity of human life, especially infanticide, euthanasia, abortion, and suicide. It was no mere coincidence that these contentious issues emerged at the same time that Darwinism was gaining an influence. And here is a site with many videos that document the overwhelming detrimental moral impact that Darwinian thinking has had on society at large. As to how people handle morality overall, and as is made evident in the atheist's own argument from evil against the reality of God. Many times people have a very hard time reconciling an all-powerful, all-good God with the existence of evil. Yet it is interesting to point out that, unlike other religions, Christianity does not shy away from the problem of evil, but instead addresses the problem head-on. As Benjamin Weicker observes in the following article, with the incarnation, the reality of evil is absorbed into the deity, not dissolved into thin air, because God freely tastes the bitterness of the medicine as wounded healer, not distant doctor. Further, given the drastic nature of this solution, we begin to recognize that God takes the problem of evil more seriously than we could ever have taken it ourselves. Moreover, although all religions agree that man is morally imperfect, and all religions therefore have some method for man to try to use to meet some level of moral perfection, only Christianity realistically addresses the moral dilemma that man finds himself in and plainly states what should be blatantly obvious for all to see. That is to say, that no imperfect human, through his own efforts, no matter how valiant his efforts may be, will ever reach the moral perfection of God. And as imperfect humans, we therefore must rely on Jesus Christ to bridge that infinite moral gap between imperfect man and perfect God. That is to plainly say, all religions besides Christianity try to bridge the unbridgeable moral gap between God and man with man's own works, whereas Christianity is instead based on the grace of God Himself to bridge and or atone for that unbridgeable gap. In technical terms, this is known as propitiation. And here are a few videos that clearly explain what propitiation means. One final note on the problem of evil. At around the 15 to 17 minute mark of the following near-death experience testimony, Dr. Mary Neal spoke about how she, when in the presence of God during her death, and from being able to see things from that much higher, quote-unquote, omniscient perspective, finally understood why God allows evil in the world. She finally got it. And she finally understood how our limited perspective on evil severely clouds our judgment and our reactions to evil tragedies that may happen in our lives while we are here on this earth. The take-home message, at least for me personally, is that we should lean on God's understanding and not on our own understanding, especially in times of crisis. Well, that's the end of the video. Thanks very much for watching. And again, all papers and videos referenced in this video may be accessed in the link provided in the video description. Thanks again for watching.